Some hills look like they were carefully placed by a giant landscaper with a serious obsession for symmetry. Except these hills didn't need landscapers or landscaping apps. Welcome to the Chocolate Hills of Bohol, Philippines. More than 1,200 perfectly shaped mounds stretching across the horizon like nature got bored of flatness and thought, let's spice things up. You might be wondering why they're called Chocolate Hills. Spoiler, it's not because someone dropped a giant cocoa bomb from the sky. In the dry season, the grass covering these hills turns a rich milk chocolate brown. And that's when locals started calling them, well, chocolate. Nature has a way of sneaking dessert into your sightseeing, apparently. Now here's where things get wild. These hills aren't random lumps of dirt. Nope, they're actually made of limestone covered in grass, sculpted over thousands of years. Rainwater, erosion, and a very patient geological clock did the work. Basically, it's nature's slow-motion sandcastle that somehow didn't wash away. And get this, the hills are almost identical. They're like a synchronized swimming team of hills, each one showing up on time, no excuses. Here's a fact most people don't know. Even though over 1,200 hills spread across the landscape, none of them are exactly alike. Seriously, count the peaks, wander around, and you'll notice subtle differences. Nature loves to keep humans humble. And if you think locals just named them for the color, folklore steps in to make it spicy. One tale says a giant heartbroken over lost love cried so much that his tears became the hills. Another claims two feuding giants threw boulders at each other until the landscape was littered with symmetrical mounds. Pick your favorite tragedy or fight. Either way, the hills got a story that sounds like the perfect rom-com or action movie rolled into one, without the popcorn. But the real geological twist? These hills sit atop a layer of clay and sand underneath the limestone. Over centuries, rainwater carved channels, washed away softer material, and left these conical shapes standing like they were daring gravity to mess with them. The hills might look playful, like giant scoops of chocolate pudding, but they're a testament to patience, erosion, and a little bit of stubbornness from Mother Earth herself. And don't get started on the view. From the observation decks, you can see the hills ripple like a green and brown sea, and when the sun hits just right, shadows dance across the slopes like the hills are waving at you, saying, yeah, we know we look amazing. No need to thank us. Travelers usually snap photos, post them online, and leave. But locals know there's a quiet magic in the hills. It's not just about the shape, the chocolate color, or even the myths. It's about walking among them and realizing the world is way more creative than your Instagram feed will ever make it seem. While tourism has boomed, the hills are part of a protected area. That's right, more than 1,000 lumps of paradise are on environmental lockdown. So when you're snapping selfies, remember, they've been around since the Pliocene epoch. Basically, they've been chilling for millions of years, long before you even had a bucket list. Respect the OGs. And before anyone tries to eat them, don't. They're limestone. Crunchy, ugly-tasting limestone. Chocolate Hills might be dessert in name only, but the view? 100% feast for the eyes. But wait, here's where it gets even more ridiculous. There's a theory that these hills were originally coral reefs. Yep, the very ocean that laps the Philippine Islands millions of years ago slowly pushed its way up, and over time, tectonic activity nudged those reefs above sea level. So technically, you could call them ancient underwater desert mountains. That's a sentence you never thought you'd say in your life. And if you thought the hills were just a solo act, think again. They cover an area of more than 50 square kilometers. That's a lot of hills for anyone to keep track of. In fact, it's said that if someone tried to walk across all of them without stopping, they'd probably age about a week in the sun before finishing. Nature clearly doesn't care about human patience. There's a viewing spot called the Chocolate Hills Complex, where you can see the hills in a perfect panoramic arc. Photographers lose their minds here, because every angle somehow looks better than the last. And if you time it right, sunrise or sunset, the hills glow in this surreal gradient from green to deep chocolate brown. It's like watching the world's slowest color transition, and somehow it never gets boring. And just when you think you've learned everything, the hills throw in one last surprise. The grass covering them actually helps protect the limestone underneath from erosion. So the hills are basically wearing a natural jacket, and yet they somehow look better than any jacket you've ever owned. Mother Nature, 1. Humans, 0. Here's a fun fact most tourists don't catch. The hills aren't scattered randomly. They're in clusters, forming neat rows and patterns that almost feel like someone tried to lay them out like a giant game of chocolate checkers. And unlike most hills that just sit there silently, these hills have a presence. Walk among them, and you get this subtle sense that the landscape itself is alive, watching, judging your hiking shoes, maybe even thinking about borrowing your backpack. And if that wasn't enough, some studies suggest that these hills are slowly shrinking. Tiny, tiny amounts every year. Not enough to notice in a lifetime, but over millennia, the hills themselves will change shape, like aging chocolate that softens and sinks. So, technically, the chocolate hills we see today aren't the same as the ones your grandparents may have photographed. They're living slow-motion art. And here's something that will make your inner nerd grin. The chocolate hills are a geomorphological phenomenon so unique that no other place on Earth has this exact combination of limestone mounds. Sure, there are other hills around the world, but none that turn chocolate in the dry season while staying perfectly conical and symmetrical. The hills are basically flexing on the rest of the planet. Apparently, local farmers used to climb some of these hills to plant coconuts and other crops. Why? Because flatland was apparently overrated. And yes, walking up a nearly perfect cone of limestone while trying to carry a basket of coconuts sounds like a punishment invented by bored gods. And get this, some scientists have started studying the hills as a model for erosion and soil conservation. Turns out, the hills are like tiny natural labs showing how rain, vegetation, and rock interact over millions of years. So while tourists are snapping selfies, researchers are geeking out over every slope and crack, secretly judging your photography skills. Here's something even wilder. At night, the hills are rumored to have a kind of temperature trick. The limestone absorbs heat during the day and radiates it slowly at night, creating a mild microclimate. So the hills are basically walking around in a perpetual spa while humans are fanning themselves under the sun. And if the history nerd in you is curious, the chocolate hills have been referenced in Philippine literature and local stories for centuries, celebrated as natural wonders. Kings, poets, and probably very confused travelers have all stood at these hills, scratching their heads, asking the same question we all do. How on earth did this happen? Some scientists suggest that these hills might be slowly tilting ever so slightly due to tectonic movements. Nothing dramatic. But over millions of years, the whole Chocolate Hills experience could look subtly different than it does today. So in a sense, they're not just living, they're aging, moving, evolving, and still looking like dessert. Locals sometimes joke that if aliens ever landed, they'd probably just park their spaceship on a chocolate hill, take a panoramic photo, and leave. Because honestly, who could resist this view? Even extraterrestrials would double tap. So yeah, these hills aren't just cute lumps of earth. They're ancient, eccentric, perfectly sculpted monuments to patience, geology, and the occasional giant tantrum. And if your brain isn't buzzing yet, just remember, they've been around since before humans even had snacks. These hills have witnessed civilizations rise and fall, wars, celebrations, and a lot of tourists with selfie sticks. They don't care. They just sit there, chocolate-colored and smug, like the ultimate Instagram influencers of the geological world. If this kind of natural oddball beauty gets your brain buzzing, you'll want to stick around. More places, more stories, more secrets of Earth slowly getting revealed, one mind-blowing location at a time. This is Earthniverse, slowly building a video nature encyclopedia. Stick around, subscribe, and let's explore together.